He wrote the book in 9 days. Not from memory exactly, though it was largely from memory, reconstructed from notes that had been taken from him at the gates of Auschwitz and rewritten from scratch in the weeks after liberation. Not from a position of distance or philosophical calm, from the specific, raw, still unprocessed experience of a man who had survived 4 concentration camps in 3 years and was trying, before the experience calcified into something he could no longer reach, to say exactly what he had found there. The book was called, in its original German, Trotzdem Ja zum Leben sagen, which translates with a precision that the English title loses as Saying Yes to Life in Spite of Everything. In English, it was published as Man's Search for Meaning. It has sold over 16 million copies. It has been listed by the Library of Congress as one of the 10 most influential books in the United States. It is assigned in medical schools and philosophy departments and theology programs and corporate leadership training and hospice care education because the question it answers is the question that every human life, at some point, cannot avoid. What do you do when you cannot change what is happening to you? Not how do you fix it, not how do you escape it, not how do you find the lesson and extract the growth and emerge stronger from the crucible that self-help has made of every form of human suffering. What do you do? How do you remain fully, recognizably, irreducibly human when the circumstances are beyond your power to alter and the suffering is beyond your power to end? Viktor Frankl answered this question from the inside, in Auschwitz, in Dachau, in the specific, unimaginable darkness of the worst the 20th century produced. And what he found there, what survived, what could not be taken, what remained when everything else had been stripped away, may be the most important thing any human being has written down in the last 100 years. There is a particular kind of suffering that the modern world is not equipped to handle. Not the suffering that has a solution, not the crisis that responds to intervention, the problem that yields to effort, the difficulty that can be reframed into opportunity with the right perspective and the right tools. The suffering that cannot be fixed, the diagnosis that is what it is, the loss that does not have another side, the circumstance of health, of relationship, of a life that has arrived at a place it cannot be moved from, that simply must be lived inside. The modern world has one primary instruction for this kind of suffering. It is dressed in many different languages: resilience, post-traumatic growth, the silver lining, the lesson hidden in the darkness, but the instruction is always essentially the same.
Find a way to feel better about it. And what Viktor Frankl discovered, in conditions that make every ordinary form of this suffering look manageable by comparison, is that the instruction is not only insufficient, it is, in a precise and important sense, wrong. The goal is not to feel better about the suffering. The goal is to find, inside the suffering, not despite it, not after it, but within it, a meaning that makes the suffering bearable, that gives it a why sufficient to sustain any how. Those are different projects, and only one of them actually works. Viktor Frankl was born in Vienna in 1905. He was a psychiatrist, one of the most gifted of his generation, a student of both Freud and Adler, who had already by his early 30s developed a distinctive therapeutic approach he called Logotherapy, from the Greek logos, meaning meaning. Where Freud had argued that the primary drive was toward pleasure, and Adler had argued it was toward power, Frankl argued, based on his clinical observations and his own philosophical development, that the deepest human drive was toward meaning. That human beings could survive almost any what if they had a sufficient why. He was Jewish. In 1942, he and his wife and his parents were deported to Theresienstadt. His father died there within months. In 1944, he was transferred to Auschwitz. His wife was sent to Bergen-Belsen, where she died. His mother was killed in the gas chambers at Auschwitz. His brother died in a camp. He arrived at Auschwitz with a manuscript, the original version of the book he had been writing, the first full articulation of logotherapy, the professional work of a decade. He had sewn it into the lining of his coat. It was taken from him at the gates, along with everything else. What followed, across 3 years in 4 camps, was the involuntary experiment that would either confirm or destroy everything he had theorized from the safety of a Viennese consulting room. He paid attention, even there, especially there, watched what happened to the people around him, which ones survived longest, not physically, but psychologically. Which ones maintained something recognizable as dignity and personhood under conditions designed to eliminate both? Which ones found a reason to continue when reason had given out?
The central observation of man's search for meaning, the one that everything else depends on, is stated simply, almost too simply for what it contains. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Everything can be taken, the possessions, the relationships, the health, the professional identity, the future that was planned and assumed and depended upon, the comfort, the safety, the ordinary daily texture of a life that made sense. In Auschwitz, they took his name, gave him a number, took his clothes, his food, his freedom of movement, his family. They took, with systematic and industrial efficiency, every external marker of a self, and could not reach what remained. Not because Frankl was exceptional. He is careful to say this repeatedly, that he is not describing a heroism available only to certain extraordinary people, but because the space between stimulus and response, the interior space where a human being decides in some fundamental and irreducible way who they are going to be in response to what is happening, that space cannot be entered from the outside. It can only be surrendered from within. And Frankl watched, in the barracks, in the work details, in the selections, who surrendered it and who did not. And he saw that the ones who did not were not the strongest physically, not the youngest, not the most fortunate in their circumstances. They were the ones who had found a why. He describes a moment, one of many in the book, but this one has stayed with readers for 80 years because it is so small and so complete, that occurred on a forced march in the pre-dawn dark of an Austrian winter. The prisoners are walking in the dark and the cold, forced along by guards, frostbitten and starving, and beyond the point where physical endurance has any rational basis. And the man walking beside Frankl says to him, quietly, almost to himself, that he is thinking about his wife, has been thinking of her, talking to her in his mind as he walks, asking what she would say, listening in the interior silence for the answer. Frankl writes that in that moment, he understood something about love that his training in psychiatry had not prepared him for. That love is not merely an emotion, or a biological drive, or a social arrangement. That love is a way of knowing, a form of perception that does not require the presence of its object. That the man walking in the dark beside him was fully, genuinely, in some sense that matters, in the presence of his wife, who had already, though he did not yet know it, died. Frankl writes, I understood how a man who has nothing left in this world still may know bliss, be it only for a brief moment, in the contemplation of his beloved.
nothing left in this world. And bliss, not despite the circumstances, not by transcending them, by finding, inside the interior space that the circumstances could not reach, something real enough to anchor the self to its own continued existence. There is a passage in Man's Search for Meaning that I want to read carefully, because it is the most important thing Frankl ever wrote, and it is the one that most readers pass over in their hurry to reach the more obviously dramatic sections of the book. He is describing the moment, toward the end of his time in the camps, in the days before liberation, when he walked out into a field alone and spoke aloud, to God, to the emptiness, to whatever was listening or not listening. And he writes, "I understood how a man who has nothing left in the world may still know bliss, that love is the ultimate and highest goal to which man can aspire. The salvation of man is through love and in love."
Then, later, the passage I want to stay with, about suffering. If there is a meaning in life at all, then there must be a meaning in suffering. Suffering is an ineradicable part of life, even as fate and death. Without suffering and death, human life cannot be complete. Suffering is an ineradicable part of life. Not suffering can be overcome. Not suffering is a temporary condition on the way to something better. Ineradicable, permanent, part of the structure of what a human life is, not an interruption of it, not a failure of it, not evidence that something has gone wrong. And therefore, the question is not how to eliminate it. The question is what you do inside it, what meaning you bring to it, what why you find that makes the how survivable. Now the bridge. Because Viktor Frankl's suffering was extreme in ways that require the same care we applied to Harriet Tubman and Eleanor Roosevelt, the acknowledgement that direct comparison to the camps is not to point and would not be useful. But the mechanism he identified, the interior space between stimulus and response, the freedom to choose one's attitude that cannot be taken from outside but can only be surrendered from within, this mechanism is not scale-dependent. Most of us are not in Auschwitz, but most of us are or will be in circumstances we cannot change, the diagnosis that is what it is, the loss that does not resolve, the relationship that has arrived at a place it cannot be moved from, the career that has closed, the body that is doing what bodies do over time, regardless of what we would prefer. And we are living, most of us, inside the modern world's instruction, which is to find a way to feel better about it, to extract the lesson, to reframe the limitation into opportunity, to emerge from the darkness having grown. Frankl does not tell you to feel better. He tells you something harder and more true. Find the why, not after the suffering has passed, inside it, now, in the specific, unimproved, unreframed reality of the circumstances as they actually are. The why does not have to be large. It does not have to be cosmic. The man on the march was thinking of his wife. That was enough. It is almost always enough.
Here is what Viktor Frankl asks of you, practically, today. First, name the irreducible thing. Not to dwell in it, not to perform suffering, to apply Frankl's clarity to your specific situation, the circumstance in your life that is what it is, that has not responded to effort or reframing or the passage of time or the various interventions you have applied to it, and that, in some fundamental sense, simply must be lived inside. Name it, without the softening, without the silver lining appended automatically the way we have been trained to append it.
just the thing as it actually is, in honest language. Frankl believed that the willingness to name the suffering clearly, without the anxious rush toward meaning, was the necessary precondition for finding meaning that was real rather than performed. Second, ask the why question. Not what is the lesson, not how do I grow from this. Frankl's question is more specific and more demanding. In the suffering you have just named, what meaning can you bring to it? Not find in it, as if the meaning were hidden there, waiting to be discovered. Bring to it, choose, from the interior space that the circumstances cannot reach. The meaning can be relational, the person you love and are staying present for. It can be creative, the work that only your specific, suffering-shaped experience makes possible. It can be what Frankl called attitudinal, the choice of who you are going to be inside the thing you cannot change, which is itself a form of meaning, perhaps the deepest form. Write it down. One sentence. The why that makes this particular how survivable. Third, protect the interior space. Frankl's freedom, the last of the human freedoms, exists in the space between stimulus and response. Most of us have allowed that space to collapse, have trained ourselves through years of reactivity and the particular speed of a culture that rewards instant response, to move from stimulus to reaction without passing through the space where the choice lives. Practice the pause. Once today, when something happens that demands a reaction, wait. Not long. A breath, a moment of deliberate stillness in the space between what has happened and what you do with it. In that pause, however brief, is the freedom Frankl is describing, the one thing that cannot be taken. Practice finding it before you need it desperately.
Fourth, find the man on the march. Frankl survived, in part, because he was paying attention to the people around him, to what kept them human, to the conversations that happened in the dark and the small acts of unexpected generosity that the camps produced alongside the horror. There is someone in your life who is in their version of the forced march, who is carrying a circumstance they cannot change and has not yet found the why that makes it survivable, who needs not advice, not silver linings, someone walking beside them in the dark, who is also looking for the meaning and not pretending to have found it yet. Be that person. Walk beside them. Ask what they are thinking about as they walk. The presence itself, the simple, costly, completely human act of being there in the unmarshaled darkness, is its own form of meaning for both of you. I want to close with the last page of Man's Search for Meaning, not the famous passages, the ones that have been quoted in graduation speeches and framed on office walls. The last page, the one where Frankl steps back from the philosophy and says something small and direct and completely unadorned. He has been describing what logotherapy asks of a patient, has been making the case, carefully, with all the precision of a Viennese psychiatrist, for the primacy of meaning as the organizing principle of a human life. And then he stops and writes, "What is demanded of man is not, as some existentialist philosophers teach, to endure the meaninglessness of life, but rather to bear his incapacity to grasp its unconditional meaningfulness in rational terms." To bear his incapacity to grasp its unconditional meaningfulness in rational terms. Not the meaning is clear, not the lesson is obvious, not the suffering makes sense if you look at it correctly. The meaning is there. It is unconditional, present in every circumstance, including the worst the century produced. But it cannot be grasped rationally,
It can only be lived toward, chosen, brought to the circumstances from the interior space that no circumstance can reach. Viktor Frankl walked out of Auschwitz, rewrote his manuscript in 9 days, spent the next 50 years teaching what he had found in the dark. Not because the finding made the camps acceptable, because the finding made the rest of his life, the decades of work and love, and the slow, patient building of a philosophy from the ruins of everything else, fully, completely, unconditionally worth living. That is his gift, not the comfort of a man who did not suffer, the testimony of a man who suffered everything and found inside everything enough.
Here is the question Viktor Frankl leaves us with today. Not from safety, not from a life that did not ask everything of him, from the specific authority of a man who found the last human freedom in the worst human circumstances and spent 50 years making sure the rest of us knew it was available. In the circumstance you cannot change, the one that is what it is, that has not responded to effort or time or the various remedies you have applied, what is the why? Not after the suffering has passed, now, inside it. In the space between what is happening and who you are going to be in response. Leave that in the comments, because that answer, your Frankl answer, found in the interior space that nothing outside can reach, is not a small thing. It is the manuscript, reconstructed from memory, written in 9 days, saying yes in spite of everything. I'll see you in the next one.